Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a single powerful source to unpack really a pivotal and quite somber moment in aviation history. Our mission is to understand how one single devastating tragedy can actually serve as a catalyst for profound systemic changes across an entire industry's approach to safety.
Exactly. We're looking into China Southwest Airlines Flight 4509 today. This was a domestic flight back in 1999 that ended tragically. It's a grim topic, no doubt, but it's an essential deep dive, really, into what happens when an industry is forced to confront its safety practices head on. Often, it takes a critical incident like this.
Right. So let's start with the facts of the incident itself. Can you maybe set the scene for us?
Absolutely. So it was February 24th, 1999, China Southwest Airlines Flight 4509. It was a Boeing 737-300. It crashed near Ruyan in Zhejiang province, just shortly before it was supposed to land in Wenzhou.
And the outcome?
Tragically, everyone on board was lost, all 50 passengers and the 11 crew members, so 61 people in total.
Well, 61.
Yeah. It immediately became one of the deadliest air disasters in China's history at that point. And what's significant here, I think, is that it was just a routine service. The aircraft itself was about 10 years old, a 737-300, with no history of major incidents before this.
Okay. And what about the conditions at the time? I gather the weather wasn't great.
No, not at all. The crash happened during the final descent, and the weather was, pretty challenging. Heavy rain, very low visibility. Witnesses on the ground actually reported seeing the plane come down very, very rapidly before it slammed into a riverbank.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it broke apart on impact, wreckage scattered quite widely, just a terrible scene.
Okay, so the official investigation, led by the Civil Aviation Administration of China, the SIAC, that's China's main aviation regulator, right?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah.
The SIAC handled the investigation.
What did they determine? What was the primary cause they pinpointed?
Well, they concluded the primary cause was pilot error. Essentially, the flight crew didn't properly monitor their altitude and airspeed during the instrument approach.
Instrument approach. That's when they're flying basically just by their instruments because of the poor visibility.
Exactly. Critical in conditions like heavy rain or fog. And this failure to monitor led directly to an uncontrolled descent. They lost control of the aircraft's vertical path.
That sounds like a fundamental breakdown.
Mm-hmm.
But, often in these situations, it's not just one single thing, is it? Did the investigation uncover deeper, maybe systemic issues?
You've hit on a really critical point there.
Yes.
Yes. While pilot error was the immediate trigger, the investigation also pointed towards other contributing factors, things like inadequate training, specifically for flying in adverse weather conditions. And there was also the possibility of pilot fatigue playing a role.
Good.
And if you connect those dots to the bigger picture, well, the crash really exposed some deep-seated vulnerabilities within China's aviation industry at that time.
Such a...
Well, things like somewhat lax safety oversight, and crucially, this period saw incredibly rapid expansion in air travel. But the infrastructure, particularly pilot training standards and regulatory practices, just hadn't kept pace with that growth. Safety margins were, you could say, stretched thin.
Right. Growth was maybe prioritized over ensuring the safety systems were robust enough for that scale.
That seems to be a fair assessment of the situation back then, yeah.
So it's quite stark how one incident can force such a massive change. How exactly did Flight 4509 become this catalyst for sweeping reforms in Chinese aviation?
It really was a major turning point. The sheer scale of the tragedy, plus the clear exposure of those systemic weaknesses, made it impossible to ignore. The SIAC had to act.
And they did.
Oh, yes. In response, they implemented significantly stricter regulations across the board. This included a major overhaul of pilot certification requirements. For instance, much more emphasis was placed on advanced simulator training, especially for handling difficult conditions like the poor weather Flight 4509 encountered.
So practical scenario-based training.
Exactly. Plus, they dramatically improved air traffic control protocols and procedures, and there was huge investment in modernizing the whole aviation infrastructure, airports, navigation systems, everything.
So it wasn't just like patching up a few specific holes. It sounds more like a fundamental shift.
It absolutely was. These reforms weren't just isolated fixes. They were part of a much broader, more aggressive push to modernize China's entire aviation sector. They knew air travel demand was going to explode in the 2000s, and they needed the system to be ready and, crucially, safe.
And did it work? Did these changes have a tangible effect?
The data suggests yes. The direct result was a noticeable reduction in accident rates in the years that followed. It really demonstrated how addressing those critical gaps in training, oversight, and regulation could make a difference. It marked a real shift, away from maybe a growth at all costs mentality towards putting safety firmly first.
Looking back then, what's the lasting message from this? The lessons learned from Flight 4509 undeniably helped make flying safer for millions. It's a powerful, if tragic, example of how disaster can spur vital safety advancements.
Absolutely. This crash remains a very somber but also potent reminder of why rigorous proactive safety standards are just non-negotiable in aviation. And maybe for you, the listener, it's worth thinking about this. How can other industries that are experiencing rapid growth today, maybe tech, maybe something else, how can they apply these hard-learned lessons? Lessons about embedding comprehensive safety culture and thorough training before a crisis forces their hand. It's really about anticipating risk, isn't it? Rather than just reacting after the fact.
A crucial point, building safety in from the start, not waiting for the wake-up call.